Oh, great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Glad you could join us today. So a two-day webinar series here, which is Storm Readiness, Response, and Recovery. We call it 3 hours. Today and Wednesday. So our agenda, whoops. What happened here? Oh, excuse me. So getting oriented here, right? Good morning. So I just wanted to share a little bit of information that for maybe those of you that joined the webinar that we had introducing this program back in April, because one, it's certainly interesting information, and two, we were asking what all your needs were out there, and we listened to this information. It's great. So here's just a couple of questions that we asked. What was the most significant challenge for responding and managing to a damaging event? And you can see it fairly equally. So assess qualified tree crews, access, tree assessment expertise, and storm event management. So we are certainly going to be talking about all those issues here today in some detail. The other questions, there was 2 of them that were really wide open. So I did a little word cloud to see what floated to the top. And really asked what assistance or topics you would like to learn more about in terms of storm management and storm tree management. So interestingly, no surprises, but training, assessment being a big one coming through, planning, contracts. So anyway, I thought it was interesting, and certainly it frames how the work we're putting together to share with you today. Okay, so our agenda for today is readiness. We have a great group of speakers. James Collins from the NC Public Safety, Department of Public Safety. We're going to be talking about emergency management. Myself, Jennifer, and we'll be handling our presentations today, and then obviously on Thursday we're going to get into response and recovery. So I'm going to start with sharing a little bit about myself. I have a bachelor's degree in natural resource management from Colorado State University. I have 30 years of experience. You can see I have some gray hair to prove it. I put myself through school, climbing trees and doing commercial arboriculture and landscaping. I was city forester for the city of Rochester, New York for 10 years, which I'm managing the forestry division in the care of 72,000 public trees. Through that time, I led responses to many events, thunderstorms, up to even 2 federal disasters, one being a major one that ultimately required removal, replacement of 14,000 public trees, and then restoration pruning. So after that, I was in consulting for 18 years, primarily up in upstate New York, but also in Colorado, and ultimately led me here to help the folks in North Carolina, and I'm really excited. That was 3 years ago. So I just want to begin with a poll quickly about Leslie. Go ahead and take out. Would like to see who all is joining us. And
sure. The first poll is out there right now, is asking what your community population is. I'll just give everybody a few seconds to make that click and do your best guess. If you don't happen to know your community population exactly, it's just to give us a sense of who we've got on today's webinar. So I'll just give everybody about another 5 or 10 more seconds so they can get their selection in, and then I'll share that so everybody can see where we are with things. All right. I think we've got most everybody responding, so I am going to go ahead and close that and share it for everybody so you can see who we've got on the call. It looks like half the folks on the call come from communities that are greater than 100,000 people, followed behind by tied for second is the 5,000 to 25,000 population, and then 50,000 to 100,000, with just a handful of folks in the smaller communities of less than 5,000.
Awesome. So we kind of have a good broad representation here.
Yep. You want to run into the second one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Second question from everybody. Does your community have a storm damage response plan currently in place? Do you yes, no, or you're not sure? That'll give Andy an idea of everybody's experience and knowledge and background on this coming into it. So I'll just give everybody a few more seconds to put in their responses. No wrong answers here. It's just to give us a sense of who we've got. And then with that, I'll go ahead and close it and share the responses. It looks like we have, well, that's a great response. Now, 52% of the folks on the call today do currently have a storm damage response plan in place, and then 38% are not sure, and 10% say no.
Great.
And then the last poll for this part of the segment is just to get a sense of who we've got with what your profession is. So let us know, what kind of backgrounds we have on here. Are you an arborist or a forester? Are you in the public works department, parks and rec department? Are you a planner or landscape architect or other? Just want to see what the makeup is of the profession on the call today. I'll just give everybody a few seconds there. Looks like we've got most folks responding quickly, which is great. I'll go ahead and share that. Most of the folks on here, 78% of the folks on here, are either an arborist or forester in their profession, private or municipal. Followed up with 9% at Parks and Rec. We got a couple of public works and planners and landscape architects, with one or two others that fit in there.
Okay, great. So yeah, aside from, more importantly, I think is we're going to be asking you a series of questions, and you'll see those responses. So knowing a bit about the group, and when we do this in person, we can see and perhaps have some dialogue. But equally, I'm interested to see who all is there. But also, as we go through this presentation, you folks know, as people are replying, you get some perspective too. So, okay. So moving on, thank you. And so I just want to start with a bit of perspective quickly about our program here, putting first in place, what storms in North Carolina. We go from those that are relatively frequent to those that are less, and less damaging to more severely damaging. Point being here is that more often than not, you're dealing with these regular thunderstorms, and those can be equally, very damaging or not as damaging. Obviously, a hurricane or a tornado is going to be devastating, particularly where the impact area is. The process we're going to go through today is going to allow you to have a scalable system to respond to either one of those events. But also in terms of mitigating damage, in the end, we're going to be really trying to address mitigating damage at the lower wind speeds in our thunderstorm events, and then even out at the margins of a tornado or a hurricane where those wind speeds are less, there is still damage. So just to paint that perspective a bit, that our work is going to be centered around those issues. Another perspective too is urban, emergency management. Planners divided into 4 phases: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And our 3 R's process breaks it into 3. Readiness is going to include mitigation and preparedness, response and recovery. Our program, there's a series of brochures that are going to be published shortly. The checklist that we provided today, I invite you to print that out and perhaps use it, because it's we're going to be going through all that information. But ultimately, you can find all of our this information at our website, like going to Trees and Storms, And all the documents that we're going to be talking about and templates and so forth can be found here. So, okay. Finally, the organizational structure for management in the U.S. North Carolina is the Incident Command System. And this is the organizational structure for the 3 R's: to prepare and respond and recover to a storm damage event. We're going to start here and begin with the big picture, how it works from the state level down to our planning process at the community level. And joining us, I'm pleased to introduce James Collins. And James and Leslie, if we want to pass off to James, we'll introduce him.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, James. So James has 33 years in emergency service with a background in fire rescue, EMS, emergency management, as well as public health preparedness. He retired from local government after 29 years and began his career with the North Carolina State Emergency Management, working out of the Central Branch office as a multi-hazard field planner and radiation emergency planner. He holds credentials as a Type 3 all-hazard liaison officer, operations section chief, as well as an incident commander. He's married for 26 years and has one daughter, Abby, who is 15. So take it away, and thank you for joining us, James.
Thank you, Andy. Welcome, everyone. Andy said he had been in it 33 years, and his turned gray, mine turned loose, as you can see by the photo. So we'll jump right in here today and get started. Andy spoke a little bit about the phases of emergency management. Preparedness, that's our planning, our training, our exercise. We always think of that happening, hopefully, in those clear blue and 72-degree days when it's nice out. Unfortunately, our responses don't usually occur in those beautiful days. That's our daily incidents and our large-scale disasters. Recovery, we think of in 2 different buckets when it comes to state and federal recovery. We look at individual assistance, which is for our homeowners, our citizens, and then we think about our public assistance, which is our businesses, our nonprofits, churches, and our municipalities, cities, states. And then our mitigation, that's when we look at it from the planning. What can we plan for to not have as bad of an impact in our next disaster, such as looking at zoning? Do we need to change our zoning ordinances where people don't build necessarily in floodplains, or people build structures that are more soundly resilient through building codes to withstand more wind or elevation so that things don't get flooded? So all that becomes part of that circle of the phases of emergency management. And y'all just kind of drew out your 3 R's out of that, which works great. It still keeps you in that same mindset. And then when you start talking to emergency management and planners in emergency management, they understand where you're getting those phases from. In North Carolina, emergency management is set up under General Statute 166A. That's what gives the authority to the governor, the state agencies, and local governments to set up an emergency management system for their organization in their area. And actually, that act specifically says, 166A4, that a disaster is an occurrence or imminent threat of a widespread or severe damaging, injury, loss of life or property resulting from any natural, man-made, accidental, military, or paramilitary cause. Now, we know we've been in COVID for the last 18, 19 months, and that, whether you want to say it was natural or man-made, I don't really care, but it was a disaster because it definitely had a significant impact on lives, as we know. 166A7 specifically, though, says that each county, each governing body will have someone who holds that position as the emergency manager. So that is the person that can order those resources through the state and federal government, some at a cost, to help in a disaster. Usually that power and authority is spread across 3 people, and annually that is updated with the state on who those 3 individuals are. And those counties that also oversee the municipalities. The municipality can have an emergency manager depending on the size of it, but they would still go to the county in order to request those resources on behalf of that municipality. All emergency services work under what we call the ICS, or the Instant Command System. The Instant Command System has been around since the 70s. It came out of the major wildfires in California. It was basically needed to standardize an approach to the command and control of all the resources that were brought to bear on those wildfires. It provided a common hierarchy with which responders from multiple agencies can be effective under one leader. And it kind of takes away that paramilitary organizational where you may be a chief officer in your daily job, but when you respond to that major incident, you may not be the chief any longer. You may be working for someone else. In 2003, the Homeland Security Presidential Directive 5 was signed, which basically established the National Incident Management System, which mandated a minimum training for all persons with roles and responsibility during an emergency incident. NIM serves to enhance the ability to manage it, establishing a single standardized and comprehensive incident management system of best practices for incident management, regardless of the size, the nature, the duration, the location, the scope, or the complexity, because it is expandable and it's scalable to the event that you have. The training, a lot of it can be done online. And I always laugh, leave it up to the government to name things that don't make sense. The courses that we think of as kind of the basis are called ICS 700, 800, 100, and 200. Now, you would think if you were just going to go out and take those classes, you would take 100, then 200, then 700, then 800, but that's not actually the way they're designed out to be taken. Initially, you should take ICS 700, which is an introduction to the National Incident Management System. Once you complete that class, then you can go take ICS 100, which is the introduction to the Instant Command System. Once you do that, then you go on to take ICS 200, which is the basic Instant Command System for initial response. So that initial response to whatever disaster that you're working with. Then you look at taking ICS 800, which kind of introduces you to the National Response Framework, which is what all this falls under. So you can see, even though the numbering is out of order, it should be 700, then 100, then 200, then 800. Again, leave it up to the government to use those numbers and really throw things off. So in the state of North Carolina, all that authority comes down from the governor to the head of the Department of Public Safety. Under the Department of Public Safety, we have the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety, and under that person, we have emergency management. You'll notice also under there, we have the Highway Patrol, our Civil Air Patrol, National Guard, Alcohol Law Enforcement, Butner Public Safety, the Governor's Crime Commission, Crime Prevention, and Victim and Justice Services. So really, the whole left-hand side of that are all response personnel that can respond within the state. Now, sometimes we'll steal some other people out of those other ones, but the left-hand side is really response heavy during an incident. In the North Carolina Emergency Management Organization, we have our division director, who is Will Ray. He is also what's called our CERT leader, which is the State Emergency Response Team. Under him, we have our operations chief, planning section chief, logistics, recovery, and risk management. Looks real similar to that ICS structure. Under our operations, we have 3 branch offices. We have an Eastern branch office, we have a Western branch office, and the office I work out of, which is called the Central branch office. That central branch manager has under that person, we have 2 multi-hazard field planners, which I am of one in the central branch, a program assistant, the National Flood Insurance Manager for each branch, and then we have 5 area coordinators. Each one of those area coordinators have anywhere from 5 to 6, 7 counties within the state. This is what our map looks like of the state of North Carolina, our offices, our branch offices, our managers, and also our area coordinators. So all these names and numbers were good as of 8 o'clock this morning. So this is a good contact point for you to reach out if you need to speak to someone in a certain that covers a certain county for North Carolina Emergency Management or the branch managers. You also see the stars on the map in Lenoir County, Granville County, and Catawba County, which is where our branch offices are located. So when we think of emergency management, we actually look at it from all hazards. It's the hub in the center of that wheel with all the spokes going out, and we look at it from all hazards: severe weather, hurricane, snow, tornado, flood, drought, technological hazards, our hazardous materials, radiological incidents, our fixed nuclear facilities, and man-made weapons of mass destruction, cyber terrorism, which we have a lot of cyber attacks going on now, and we still do the old lost person search and rescue. All those we try to be involved in. When we think of a disaster, we always want to think of a disaster as beginning locally and ending locally. When all's said and done, the locals are still going to be there. So when that disaster occurs, the initial emergency response occurs from the locals. And think of it as when we were in college and in high school, we used to study things and we'd see a bell curve. And this kind of works along that same aspect of those local emergency responders keep throwing solutions at this problem. Maybe it's personnel, maybe it's equipment, and they keep throwing more and more. Well, eventually they run out. And when they run out and the disaster exceeds that local capability, that's when they can reach out to the county emergency management to support them. Now, the whole idea is for us to get the help that those locals need as close to them as possible, because the closer we can access either that resource or those personnel that they need, the quicker those resources and personnel can get to that location. So they would ask maybe county mutual aid, maybe another county, maybe another city. If they can't find what they need, then they would come and ask for it from the state level. If the state doesn't have that asset, doesn't know where it's at, can't get it, we can either do what we call an EMAC request, which is the Emergency Management Association Compact, which is basically mutual aid on a state-to-state basis, or we can go all the way to the federal government. So if the disaster exceeds the magnitude of the locals in the state, and we don't have it, we can go to the federal government, and we can also ask for a state or federal disaster declaration, which, if approved, starts getting state and federal monies that can come help along with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But as that disaster lessens, all those people are going to start leaving, and it comes back down to only the locals being there. So that's why we always say disasters begin local and they end local. So when that asset or that resource or that personnel are asked for, the municipality or the county would go to the county EOC or the county emergency management coordinator if the EOC is not open, and that EOC coordinator or the emergency manager would go to another county, perhaps another city, and try to get mutual aid. If there's none, they would go to the state EOC through the communication center, who would receive that resource request and immediately send it to the branch office with which that county resides. Once that branch office gets it, they're going to try to fill it locally within that branch. If not, they'll reach across to another branch. Again, if we can't find it, then we'll go all the way to the federal level if needed. Again, trying to find that resource or those personnel as close as possible to the actual disaster. When we talk about trees and storms, probably the two biggest groups that we bring to bear through emergency management is our North Carolina Forestry Service chainsaw crews and our North Carolina National Guard chainsaw crews. Emergency management in and of itself doesn't have a lot of resources. We have a whole lot of personnel, but our resources are actually live within the counties and municipalities across the state of North Carolina. We provide a lot of funding for those counties and municipalities to have resources that they agree to be able to be deployed in a disaster or in an emergency. We fund things like swift water rescue teams, urban search and rescue teams, which are, do heavy lifting, engineering, building, shoring up of buildings, searching of buildings that have been destroyed. We have our regional response teams, our hazardous materials regional response teams placed across the state. We have some search and rescue assets. And we have a lot of equipment that has been paid for and bought through Homeland Security grants that are what are housed through our domestic preparedness regions that again live with those locals at those county and municipal levels. And that equipment list is enormous. So all the requests for any of those assets go through the local EM, and some of them do have a cost incurred. And that's why you have those certain individuals that are able to ask for that, because they have to make sure that the cost incurred can be covered later on. Now, if a disaster has been declared federally, a lot of those funds can be reimbursed through the federal government. One thing that we run into a lot with storm and tree damage is we run into debris issues. Debris management, especially in a declared disaster, is reimbursable, but there's a lot of things that have to occur for it to be paid. One of those things is making sure that the debris is removed, stored, and accounted for properly. So debris management resources are very, very important to have those contracts in place. Not only do you have to have the debris management contract, the people that are actually going to pick the debris up, but you have to have another group that's not tied to the group doing that work to account for all the material being moved and how much is being moved. So there are, because it's hard for especially smaller municipalities and stuff to have all these contracts and have all this stuff in place. So there are pre-position geographic region contracts that can be piggybacked on by local jurisdictions that the state has already went out and worked up. So that is available, and you can access that by just going to the NCEM website and go under disaster recovery and under debris management. There's also an email if you have any questions about debris and debris management that you can email and ask those questions, and somebody from the recovery team will get back with you. But like I say, there's a lot of rules and regulations around that debris management. Emergency management, we look at it from the regional approach. It's impossible for any one jurisdiction, any one city, town, county, or even state for that matter, to have all the resources they're ever going to need to handle any disaster that could ever affect a community. So we have to work together with neighboring counties, states, cities to try to have those capabilities by sharing those resources, because every resource has a cost. Not only the initial cost of obtaining that resource and training the people to use it, but also the cost of maintaining that resource over its life. Mutual aid agreements between counties and the statewide mutual aid agreement help in that sharing of those resources and personnel. The thing to remember is emergency management is a community effort. It's not an individual or a single agency or county that can do everything. It's a community-wide approach. To succeed, emergency management must have everyone involved, from our elected officials, our municipalities, our community infrastructure, our volunteer agencies, private industry, and the citizens of our community, because no one can do it alone. Everyone has a role in a disaster, either preparing for it, responding to it, or recovering from it. Some people may not be able to do nothing but provide funds for a volunteer agency or something, but everyone has a role that they can play. One of the things that we've really seen come to bear here recently as a local capability is our community emergency response teams. These are teams, and they can be started by any kind of entity you can think of. We've got homeowners associations, we've got churches, we've got county-wide CERT teams, we have towns, we even have some campuses, some college and higher education campuses that have started CERT teams. If you have or know of someone that would like to do that, they can reach out to Samantha Royster. She's the North Carolina CERT program manager. There's her phone number and her email. And you can also get involved by going to readync.org and seeing if there's a CERT team close to you, perhaps. And the North Carolina Forestry Service chainsaw crews and CERT teams can work together. We have VOAD groups, our volunteers in disaster groups that work with our Forestry Service chainsaw crews and others. Baptist on Mission is one of our biggest ones, but you have several others. So I guess at this time, do I have any questions that I can answer? I guess I'll throw that back to Jennifer.
All right, thank you, James. So everybody, all the attendees, if anybody has a question for James, you can type it in that little question panel box there.